In Silver Creek, Wyoming, on a scorching summer afternoon, rancher Caleb Ward watches a woman's skull crack against sun-baked ground. Her husband's boot raised to finish the job while their 4 daughters scream on the porch, the oldest clutching a 3-day-old baby. The entire town stands frozen, watching violence like it's Sunday entertainment. Caleb hasn't spoken to another soul in 6 years, not since he buried his wife and newborn son. But today, something breaks open inside him, and he steps forward with one word that will shatter his silence and change 5 lives forever. Stay with me until the end of this story. Hit that like button, and comment what city you're watching from so I can see how far this journey travels. The heat in Silver Creek didn't just sit, it pressed down like a physical weight, turning the air thick and hard to breathe. Main Street shimmered in waves of distortion, the wooden storefronts bleached nearly white by relentless sun. Dust hung suspended in the still air, waiting for any excuse to swirl and choke. Caleb Ward rode in with his hat pulled low, his shopping list short: nails, flour, salt. Nothing that required conversation, nothing that would make anyone remember he'd been there. 6 years of living alone on the edge of town had taught him how to move through Silver Creek like a ghost, seen but not noticed, present but not engaged. His horse, a buckskin mare named Sage, knew the routine. Tie up at the general store, wait while Caleb conducted his business in silence, then head back to the ranch where the only sounds were wind through grass and the occasional complaint of settling timber in the half-finished cabin. Today should have been no different. Caleb was reaching for his saddlebag when he heard it, a sound that didn't belong in the lazy afternoon quiet. Not a shout, not a scream. Something worse, the solid, sickening crack of bone meeting hard-packed earth. His hand froze on the leather strap. Then came the screaming, high-pitched, terrified, the kind of sound that strips away childhood in an instant. Caleb turned slowly, his body already knowing what his mind didn't want to accept. Across the street, on the porch of the boarding house, 4 little girls were clustered together like frightened quail. The oldest, maybe 10, held an infant against her chest, her thin arms wrapped so tight the baby's face was turning red. The other 3 clung to her skirts, their faces white with terror. And in the dirt below the porch steps, a woman lay crumpled and still. Standing over her, his boot raised, was Darius Morse. The street wasn't empty. A dozen people stood on boardwalks and in doorways, watching. The blacksmith had his hammer arrested mid-swing. The postmaster stood frozen with a handful of letters. Mrs. Henderson from the millinery shop had both hands pressed to her mouth, but she didn't move, didn't speak. They all just watched. Darius Morse was a big man, thick through the shoulders and chest, with hands that looked like they could break wood without effort. His face was flushed red. From heat or rage or whiskey, it didn't matter. What mattered was the way he stood over his wife, his shadow falling across her motionless body like a claim of ownership. "Get up," Darius growled, his voice carrying in the terrible silence. "I said get up, you worthless—" He drove his boot into her ribs. The woman's body jerked with the impact, but she didn't cry out, didn't curl up to protect herself. She just lay there, blood seeping from somewhere near her hairline, mixing with the dust to make dark mud. On the porch, the oldest girl made a sound like a wounded animal. The baby in her arms started to wail. Caleb's hands had gone completely still on his saddlebag. His heart was pounding so hard he could feel it in his throat, in his temples, in his fingertips. For 6 years, he'd trained himself not to feel, not to engage, not to let the world touch him. But that sound, that crack of skull on earth, it had broken something open. He could see another woman lying in blood, could hear another baby crying, could feel the terrible, crushing weight of being too late, too slow, too powerless to stop what couldn't be stopped. Except this time he wasn't too late. This time, the woman was still breathing. Darius raised his boot again. "Morse!" The word came out of Caleb's mouth before he'd decided to speak it. His voice sounded strange to his own ears, rough from disuse, but steady, certain. The entire street turned to look at him. Darius's boot paused in midair. He turned slowly, his eyes narrowing with recognition and something else. Contempt, maybe? Or just the casual cruelty of a man who'd never been truly challenged. "This ain't your concern, Ward." Caleb stepped away from his horse. His boots hit the dirt with quiet purpose. 6 years of silence pressed against his tongue, trying to force him back into the safe numbness of isolation. He kept walking. "I'm making it my concern." A murmur rippled through the watching crowd. Shock, maybe, or relief that someone had finally broken the spell of collective cowardice. Darius laughed, a harsh, ugly sound. "You ain't spoke 10 words in 6 years, and now you want to play hero?" He gestured at his wife's crumpled form. "This is family business, private matters. You got no right." "She's bleeding in the street," Caleb cut him off, his voice still quiet but somehow filling the space. "That makes it public." He was close enough now to see details he wished he couldn't. The woman's dress was torn at the shoulder. Her face, turned half into the dirt, showed bruises in various stages of healing, yellow-green remnants of old violence, purple-black evidence of new. Her breathing was shallow and rapid, and on the porch, those 4 little girls were watching with the kind of stillness that came from having learned when to disappear. Caleb had seen that stillness before, had worn it himself as a child. Darius moved to block his path, his bulk deliberate and threatening. "You want to end up like her? That what you want, Ward? Because I got no problem. Step aside." Something in Caleb's tone made Darius hesitate. Maybe it was the absolute lack of fear. Maybe it was the quiet certainty of a man who'd already lost everything that mattered and therefore had nothing left to lose. Or maybe it was just that the crowd was watching, and even Darius Morse understood that some lines, once crossed in daylight, couldn't be uncrossed. He stepped aside, but his smile was ugly. "Take her then. See how long that charity lasts when she's bleeding all over your precious solitude. See how you like 4 screaming brats and a broken woman who can't even stand up straight." He spat into the dust near her head. "She's cursed, Ward. Bad luck and worse breeding. Her mama was wrong in the head, and she ain't no better. Why you think I got to correct her so often?" Caleb didn't answer. He knelt beside the woman. Evelyn, he remembered her name was Evelyn, and carefully turned her face toward him. Her eyes fluttered open. They were brown, glazed with pain and confusion. Blood matted her dark hair, and when she tried to focus on his face, her pupils weren't tracking right. "Can you hear me?" Caleb's voice came out gentler than he'd heard it in years. She blinked slowly. Her lips moved, but no sound came out. Behind him, Darius was still talking. "That's right. Run to the hermit. See if his dead wife's ghost keeps you warm at night. See if—" "Girls!" Caleb called out without turning around. His voice carried clearly to the porch. "Come down here." The oldest girl, the one holding the baby, stiffened. Her eyes darted between Caleb and her father, trapped in impossible calculation. "June, you stay right where you are," Darius ordered. "This fool wants to play savior. Let him do it alone. You and your sisters get back inside before—" "Come down here," Caleb repeated, still kneeling beside their mother. He finally looked up at them, and whatever the oldest girl saw in his face made her move. She came down the steps slowly, her sisters following in her wake like ducklings. The second oldest, maybe 7, had her hand twisted in the back of June's dress. The smallest, around 5, clutched a rag doll that had seen better years. The baby, wrapped in a blanket despite the heat, couldn't have been more than a few days old. They reached the bottom step and stopped, trembling. "What are your names?" Caleb asked quietly. The oldest lifted her chin, trying for bravery. "I'm June. This is Sadie, and that's Millie. The baby's Rosie." Her voice cracked. "Is Mama going to die?" "Not if I can help it." Caleb stood slowly, careful not to jostle Evelyn. "I need to get her on my horse. Can you girls ride?" June nodded. "Then you're coming with me." "The hell they are!" Darius lunged forward, but Caleb turned just enough to make him stop. The look in Caleb's eyes wasn't threatening. It was simply absolute, final. "You can try to stop me," Caleb said quietly, "but you'll have to do it in front of everyone here, and then we'll see how the sheriff feels about a man who beats his wife unconscious in the street and then fights to keep her from getting help." Darius's face went purple. "Sheriff Calhoun is my wife's cousin. He'll back whatever I say. You got no authority here, Ward. No rights, no—" "Then let him come say so at my ranch." Caleb turned his back on Darius Morse, a calculated insult, and bent to lift Evelyn. She was lighter than he expected, all sharp bones and wasted muscle. When he shifted her in his arms, she made a small sound of pain that cut through him like a knife. Easy, he murmured. I've got you. Her eyes opened again, just a sliver. Her cracked lips moved. Why? It was barely a whisper, but he heard it. Caleb didn't have an answer, or maybe he had too many, none of them simple enough to explain in this moment. So he just said, because I can. Getting her onto Sage took some maneuvering. The mare stood steady, used to Caleb's quiet commands. He settled Evelyn in front of the saddle, her head lolling against his chest when he swung up behind her. Girls, up. He held out his hand. June passed the baby up first, and Caleb tucked little Rosie carefully into the crook of his arm. Then June scrambled up behind him, pulling Sadie up after her. Millie stood looking uncertain until Caleb leaned down and lifted her into place. They arranged themselves in a precarious stack, 4 girls clinging to each other and to him, their mother barely conscious in his arms, a newborn whimpering against his chest. The horse shifted under the unexpected weight, but held steady. Darius was shouting now, his voice raw with fury. You're making a mistake, Ward. You hear me? A mistake you're going to regret. I'll burn that ranch of yours to the ground. But Caleb was already turning Sage toward the end of Main Street. The crowd finally moved, parted, made a corridor of shame. And then something happened that Caleb didn't expect. The shopkeeper, a thin man named Morris who'd always kept his eyes down when Darius Morse was around, stepped forward and thrust a bundle into Caleb's saddlebag. Bandages. A brown bottle that sloshed. Medicine. For the head wound, Morris said quietly. Then louder, so everyone could hear. Charge it to my account. Darius roared, but Morris had already stepped back. Caleb nodded once. Then he urged Sage forward, and they rode out of Silver Creek with the afternoon sun beating down on their backs and the weight of 5 lives pressing against his chest. Behind them, Darius Morse's threats echoed down Main Street, promising fire and retribution. But ahead, the open prairie stretched endless and clean, and for the first time in 6 years, Caleb Ward felt something crack open inside his chest that wasn't just pain, it might have been purpose. The ride to the ranch was brutal in ways Caleb hadn't anticipated. The sun didn't just shine, it hammered down like a physical force, turning the air into something you had to fight through. Sweat soaked through his shirt within the first mile. The girls behind him shifted and whimpered, unused to riding, their skin burning despite their bonnets. But worse than the heat was Evelyn's condition. She drifted in and out of consciousness, her head lolling against his shoulder. Every few minutes she'd jerk awake with a gasp of terror, her whole body going rigid until Caleb murmured, "Easy, you're safe." And she'd sag again, not quite believing but too weak to fight. Blood from her head wound seeped through the makeshift bandage he'd tied with his neckerchief, and he could feel the heat of fever starting to build in her skin. Concussion, certainly. Maybe worse. He'd seen men die from lesser blows to the head. "Is she dying?" Sadie whispered from behind him, her small voice barely audible over the creak of saddle leather and the rhythm of Sage's hooves. "No," Caleb said with more certainty than he felt. "You don't know that." This from June, her tone sharp with the kind of premature adulthood that came from being the oldest child in a house of terror. "You can't promise that." She was right, of course. He couldn't. "No," he admitted. "I can't, but I'm going to try like hell to make sure she doesn't." Silence behind him. Then, so quiet he almost missed it. Why? Caleb didn't turn around. Couldn't, not with Evelyn slumped against him and baby Rosie nestled in his arm. But he understood what June was really asking. Why would a stranger risk Darius Morse's wrath for a broken woman and her daughters? Why would a man who'd spent 6 years hiding from the world suddenly decide to break his silence for them? What did he want? Because there was always something wanted. June had learned that lesson young. "My wife died 6 years ago," Caleb said finally. The words came out rough, unused. "She was having our first child. Something went wrong. The baby came too early, and she bled. I held her hand and watched her die, and there wasn't a damn thing I could do about it. Our son died an hour later." The girls were utterly silent now. "When I heard your mother's head hit that ground today," Caleb continued, his voice steady despite the old pain rising in his throat, "I heard my wife. When I saw your father raise his boot, I saw every moment I couldn't stop death from taking what mattered. And I realized, I can't bring them back. Can't change what happened. But I could stop watching, could stop being too late. He paused, then added, Your mother asked me why I'm doing this. Truth is, I'm not entirely sure. Maybe it's just that I'm tired of feeling dead. June didn't respond, but after a moment, her small hand unclenched from his shirt, and her grip became less desperate, more like she was holding on by choice rather than terror. They rode in silence for another mile before Millie spoke up, her voice small and wondering. Is your ranch nice? It's quiet, Caleb said, and there's space, more space than you've probably ever seen. Does it have a bed? This from Sadie. Several. Will you make us sleep in the barn? Millie again, her question so matter-of-fact it broke Caleb's heart. No, sweetheart. There's a cabin. It's not finished, but there's a roof and walls and real beds. Papa said nobody would ever want us, Millie whispered. Said we were too much trouble, too many mouths. He said Mama was being selfish, having another baby when we already couldn't. Millie, hush, June cut her off, her voice tight with fear. But Caleb felt the words settle in his gut like stones. 4 little girls who'd been taught their existence was a burden. A mother who'd been punished for the crime of bringing life into a house of death. Your father, Caleb said carefully, was wrong about a lot of things. No one answered that. Maybe because they didn't believe him yet. Maybe because they'd heard too many lies from men who smiled. When the ranch finally came into view, a cluster of buildings against the vast prairie, mountains rising purple in the distance, June made a small sound of surprise. It's big, she breathed. Not finished, Caleb reminded her. The cabin's got 4 rooms, but I've only been living in 1. The barn's solid, though, and there's a well with good water. He guided Sage toward the cabin, and the girls stared around them with wide eyes. This far from town, the silence was absolute except for wind through grass and the distant cry of a hawk. No shouting, no breaking glass, no sounds of fists hitting flesh, just space and stillness and air that tasted clean. Caleb dismounted carefully, then helped June down before reaching for Evelyn. She was burning up now, her skin dry and hot to the touch. When he lifted her, her eyes opened and fixed on his face with sudden clarity. Where? Her voice was a rasp. My ranch. You're safe here. No. She shook her head, then gasped at the pain the movement caused. Nowhere's safe. He'll come. He always comes. Let him, Caleb said quietly, and carried her inside. The cabin was dim and blessedly cool after the brutal sun. Caleb had built it with thick walls and small windows, designed to hold heat in winter and keep it out in summer. He'd never finished it because there'd been no point. Who was he building for? Now, as he laid Evelyn on the bed in what should have been the master bedroom, the answer seemed obvious. For this. For moments when someone needed shelter. The girls crowded in the doorway, uncertain. Baby Rosie had started crying in earnest now, her newborn wails thin and desperate. June, Caleb said, his hands already working to peel back the blood-soaked bandage from Evelyn's head. Can you tend your sister? There should be goat's milk in the cold cellar, doors outside around the back. Mix it with a little water, warm it if you can. June hesitated, then nodded. She took Rosie from Sadie and disappeared. Sadie, Millie, I need clean water. There's a bucket by the well, and clean rags in the chest by the fireplace. They fled, grateful for purpose. Alone with Evelyn, Caleb finally let himself assess the damage. The head wound was bad, but not as bad as the blood made it seem. Scalp wounds always bled like rivers. But the bruises, those told a longer, darker story. Her ribs showed purple-black on both sides. Her left wrist was swollen. Finger-shaped marks circled her throat like a necklace. This wasn't today's violence. This was years of it. Evelyn's eyes opened, tracking his face as he worked. You'll regret this, she whispered. Maybe. He'll hurt you. He'll burn everything you have. He can try. Why don't you care? Her voice cracked. Why aren't you afraid? Caleb paused, his hands gentle on her forehead. Because I've already lost everything I loved. Fire can't take what's already gone. Her eyes filled with tears, but they didn't fall. I'm cursed, she whispered. Everyone says so. Bad blood, wrong in the head. Everything I touch turns to... Stop. Caleb's voice was firm. I don't believe in curses. I believe in men who use superstition to justify cruelty. My mother was mad, died screaming in an asylum. Darius says I'm— Darius, Caleb interrupted quietly, is a liar. Evelyn stared at him. Then, finally, the tears came, silent and wrenching, her whole body shaking with the force of them. Caleb didn't tell her to stop, didn't tell her it would be okay. He just kept working, cleaning the wound, applying the medicine Morris had slipped him, bandaging her head with careful hands. When Sadie and Millie returned with water and rags, he put them to work washing their mother's face and hands, giving them something to do besides be afraid. When June came back with a bottle of milk for Rosie, he showed her how to test the temperature on her wrist. And when Evelyn finally fell into an exhausted sleep, he gathered the girls in the main room and built them a meal from what little he had: bread, cheese, dried meat, apples from the cold cellar. They ate like starving animals, fast and desperate, eyes darting toward the door. "No one's coming tonight," Caleb said quietly. June looked at him with those old eyes. "You don't know that." "You're right, I don't. But I've got a rifle, and I'm a very light sleeper. And if your father's smart, he'll wait until he's got the law on his side before he tries anything." "Sheriff Calhoun is Mama's cousin," Sadie offered around a mouthful of bread. "But he never helps. He says family business stays family business." Caleb nodded slowly. He'd figured as much. Small towns had their own laws, and blood ties often mattered more than justice. "Then we'll figure something else out." "Like what?" June's skepticism was acid sharp. "I don't know yet," Caleb admitted, "but I'll think of something." It wasn't much of a promise, but it was honest, and somehow that mattered more than false reassurance. That night, Caleb gave the girls the second bedroom, the one he'd framed for children who never came. They piled together on the single bed, a tangle of limbs and fear, with baby Rosie in a dresser drawer lined with blankets. He sat in the main room with his rifle across his knees, listening to the sounds of 5 people breathing in his house. For 6 years, this cabin had been silent except for his own movements, a mausoleum for grief. Now it was full of life. Messy, terrified, traumatized life, but life nonetheless. And Caleb Ward, who'd spent 6 years being dead, felt something shift in his chest. Not healing? Not yet. But maybe the beginning of it. Outside, the summer night settled heavy and hot. Stars burned in a sky so vast it hurt to look at. And somewhere in town, Darius Morse was planning his next move. But for this one night, 5 people slept safe. And that, Caleb thought, was enough to start with. Morning came with heat already building before the sun cleared the horizon. Caleb woke from his chair by the window, his rifle still across his lap, his back protesting the night spent upright. Through the dusty glass, he could see the prairie stretching endless and empty. No riders, no dust clouds, no sign of Darius Morse. Yet. He stood slowly, joints popping, and moved to check on Evelyn. She was still sleeping, her breathing more even than it had been the night before. The fever had broken sometime in the dark hours, leaving her skin clammy but cooler. The bandage on her head showed only a small stain of fresh blood. The wound was clotting properly. Small mercies. Small. In the second bedroom, the girls were still tangled together like puppies, their faces slack with exhaustion. Only June's eyes were open, watching him from the pile of her sisters. She didn't speak, but her gaze followed him with the wariness of someone who'd learned to track threats even in sleep. Caleb nodded to her and moved to the kitchen. The sun was barely up, but there was work to do. Injuries to tend, supplies to inventory, defenses to consider, because Darius Morse's threats weren't idle. Men like that didn't let their property walk away without consequences. He was stoking the stove when he heard footsteps behind him. June stood in the doorway, still wearing yesterday's dusty dress, her dark hair matted on one side. "Is there food?" Her voice was flat, practical. "Cornmeal for mush, some eggs if the hens laid overnight, milk for your sister." June nodded and moved to help without being asked, her movements efficient and competent. 10 years old, and she already knew how to run a household. The thought settled in Caleb's chest like a stone. They worked in silence, the only sounds the scrape of the spoon against the pot and the pop of the fire. Caleb found himself stealing glances at her, this thin, grave child who carried the weight of her family on narrow shoulders. "You don't have to be afraid here," he said finally. June's hand paused on the spoon. "You can't promise that." "No," Caleb admitted, "but I can promise I won't be the one you're afraid of." She looked at him then, really looked, her dark eyes searching his face for the lie. "Men always say that, at first." The words hit him like a fist. "Your father. And the others before we came here? Mama's had 3 husbands. They all started nice." June turned back to the pot, stirring with mechanical precision. Then she'd get pregnant, or the money would run out, or they'd just get tired of pretending, and it would start. Caleb's hands tightened on the edge of the table. "How long has Darius been hurting her?" "Since the wedding night." June's voice didn't waver. "I heard it through the wall. Heard him tell her she was lucky he was willing to take damaged goods, that she should be grateful for his charity." "And the sheriff? Your mother's cousin?" June's laugh was bitter, decades too old for her face. "Sheriff Calhoun told Mama that marriage vows mean a man has rights, that if she can't keep her husband happy, she should expect consequences." She glanced up at Caleb. "Nobody helps. Nobody ever helps. I'm helping. For now." June pulled the pot off the heat. "But when Papa comes with the sheriff and the law papers, what then? You're just one man. You can't fight the whole town." Caleb had no answer for that. She was right. The law in small towns bent toward men with power and connections. Darius Morse had both. Caleb had a ranch and 6 years of silence. Not exactly a winning hand. The sound of crying pulled them both around. Through the wall, they could hear Rosie wailing, and then Evelyn's voice, hoarse and confused. "The baby!" Evelyn gasped. "Where's the baby? Darius, if you hurt her, I swear." June was already moving, but Caleb caught her shoulder. "Let me!" He found Evelyn trying to sit up, her face white with pain and panic. Sadie and Millie were pressed against the wall, their eyes huge with fear. Rosie screamed in her makeshift cradle. "Easy," Caleb said quietly, the same tone he'd use with a spooked horse. "You're safe. The girls are safe. You're at my ranch, remember?" Evelyn's wild eyes found his face, struggled to focus. You were in town. Yesterday." Memory crashed back and she sagged against the pillows. "Oh, God. What did I do? What did I—" "You didn't do anything. Your husband beat you unconscious in the street." Caleb moved to pick up Rosie, the tiny body hot and angry in his arms. "I brought you and your daughters here. You've been fevered through the night. He'll come for us." Evelyn's voice cracked. "He'll come and he'll—" "Let him." Caleb held Rosie against his shoulder, her cries already quieting at the change of position. "But you're not going back. Not unless you choose to." Evelyn stared at him like he'd spoken a foreign language. "Choose? You think I have choices?" "Everyone has choices. Yours might all be hard ones, but they're still yours." Before Evelyn could respond, June appeared in the doorway with a bottle of milk. Caleb passed the baby to her mother, watching as Evelyn's trembling hands struggled to hold both infant and bottle. Her broken wrist made the angle wrong, and frustration twisted her face. Without a word, Caleb knelt beside the bed and helped position Rosie, supporting Evelyn's injured arm until the baby latched onto the bottle and began to drink. Evelyn stared down at her daughter, tears sliding silent down her bruised face. "Why are you doing this?" she whispered. "I already told you. 'Cause I can." "That's not an answer." Caleb met her eyes. "It's the only one I have right now." They stayed like that. Caleb kneeling, Evelyn feeding her newborn, the morning light slanting through the small window, until Rosie finished and fell asleep milk-drunk and satisfied. When Caleb finally stood, his knees protested, and he saw something flicker across Evelyn's face. Not trust, not yet, but maybe the beginning of belief that this strange, silent man might actually mean what he said. Breakfast was a quiet affair. The girls ate their cornmeal mush without complaint, though Millie kept stealing glances at Caleb like he might suddenly transform into something dangerous. Sadie sat close to June, her small hand twisted in her sister's sleeve. Evelyn managed a few bites before exhaustion pulled her back under. Caleb left June in charge of watching her mother and took the younger girls outside to feed the chickens and check the well. The morning was already brutal, heat rising in visible waves, the sky bleached nearly white. Millie and Sadie moved through their chores with the mechanical efficiency of children who'd been trained to work without complaint. When a hen squawked and flapped at Millie's approach, the little girl flinched so hard she dropped the feed bucket. Caleb's jaw tightened. "It's all right. She's just cranky about her eggs." Millie's eyes filled with tears. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to. Papa always says I'm clumsy, that I ruin everything. I didn't." "Millie," Caleb crouched down to her level. "You didn't do anything wrong. The hen's just being a hen, and your father—" He stopped, chose his words carefully. "Your father taught you a lot of things that aren't true. It's going to take time to unlearn them." She stared at him, her bottom lip trembling. "Are you going to hit me?" The question landed like a blow. "No, sweetheart, never. Even if I break something, even if I talk too much or wake the baby or burn the food or even then," Caleb kept his voice steady despite the rage building in his chest. "People who love you don't hurt you for being human." Millie blinked, then so quietly he almost missed it. "Nobody loves me? Papa says I'm— Your father is wrong about a lot of things." Caleb straightened. "Come on, let's finish the chores before this heat gets worse." They were filling water buckets when Sadie spoke up, her voice thin and careful. "Is it true your wife died?" "Yes." "Did you love her?" Caleb's hands paused on the rope. "Very much." "Then why do you want us?" Sadie's confusion was genuine. If you loved her, why would you want someone else's family? It was a fair question. Caleb lowered the bucket and turned to face her. "I don't know if want is the right word, but yesterday when I heard your mother's head hit the ground, I remembered what it felt like to be helpless. To watch someone suffer and do nothing." He paused. "I'm tired of doing nothing." Sadie considered this with the seriousness of someone twice her age. "Mama says we're cursed, that Grandma was crazy, and it's in our blood. That's why bad things happen." "Do you believe that?" She shrugged, a gesture too weary for 7 years old. "Don't know what else to believe. Papa's always saying it. The preacher, too. Even Sheriff Calhoun told Mama she should have warned Papa about the bad blood before they married." Caleb felt something cold and angry settle in his gut. "Your mother isn't cursed. She's been beaten and blamed, and probably told lies about herself for so long she started to believe them. But that doesn't make them true." "How do you know?" "Because curses aren't real. But men who need someone to blame for their own cruelty? Those are very real." Sadie absorbed this in silence. Then, "Are you going to marry Mama?" The question caught Caleb completely off guard. "What? June says that's probably why you took us. That you want Mama for a wife, and we're just part of the bargain." Sadie's eyes were sharp, assessing. "She says you'll be nice until the wedding, and then you'll turn mean like all the others." Caleb sat down on the edge of the well, suddenly exhausted. "I'm not planning to marry your mother. I'm not planning much of anything except keeping you all safe until we can figure out what comes next." "But you live alone. Don't you want a wife?" "I had a wife. She's gone. I'm not looking to replace her." Sadie tilted her head. "Then what do you want from us?" It was the same question June had asked, phrased differently but driving at the same truth. What did he want? What was his price? "I want," Caleb said slowly, "to not feel like a ghost anymore." The girl blinked at him, not understanding, and Caleb couldn't blame her. He barely understood it himself. But something about pulling Evelyn onto his horse, about carrying these frightened children away from their father's rage, had cracked open the numbness he'd been living in. He'd spent 6 years being dead. Maybe it was time to try being alive again, even if it was messy and complicated and dangerous. The sound of hoofbeats cut through the morning air. Caleb was on his feet instantly, his hand going to the rifle he'd leaned against the well. Sadie pressed close to Millie, both girls going still and silent. But it wasn't Darius Morse who rode into the yard. It was a woman, middle-aged, weathered, riding a dappled mare with the confidence of someone who'd been born on horseback. She wore widow's black despite the heat, and her face was set in grim lines. "Ward," she called out, "need to talk to you." Caleb recognized her, Martha Hayes, a widow who ran a homestead about 5 miles east. They'd crossed paths a few times over the years, always with the minimal pleasantries of people who understood each other's need for solitude. Mrs. Hayes. He kept the rifle lowered but ready. What brings you out in this heat? Martha dismounted and looped her reins over the fence rail. Up close, Caleb could see dust caked in the lines of her face and something that looked like soot on her hands. Heard what you did in town yesterday. Heard you took Evelyn Morse and her girls. Martha's eyes flicked to Sadie and Millie, softened almost imperceptibly. Also heard Darius is promising to burn your ranch down and make you sorry you ever crossed him. Let him try. He will. Martha pulled off her riding gloves. And he won't come alone. He's already got Sheriff Calhoun convinced you kidnapped his wife, got the preacher writing up testimony about Evelyn's unstable nature and history of madness. By tomorrow he'll have papers saying you're holding his property illegally. Caleb's jaw tightened. She's not property. Law doesn't see it that way, not when there's a husband with rights and a sheriff willing to enforce them. Martha's expression was bleak. I'm not here to tell you what you did was wrong. Someone should have stood up to Darius Morse years ago, but you need to understand what you're up against. I understand. Do you? Martha stepped closer, her voice dropping. Because I've been where Evelyn is. Had a husband once who used his fists to settle every disagreement. When I finally tried to leave, he had the law on his side. Took me 3 tries and a bullet in his leg before I got free. And I only managed that because he died of infection before anyone could drag me back. The bitterness in her voice was decades deep. I'm sorry, Caleb said quietly. Don't be sorry. Be smart. Martha glanced toward the cabin. How is she? Concussed, fevered, broken wrist, bruises everywhere. Caleb's hands tightened on the rifle. But alive. That's something. Martha turned back to him. I came to warn you and to offer help if you need it. I've got supplies, ammunition, and I know how to shoot. Caleb studied her face, the hard-earned lines, the eyes that had seen too much. Why? Because someone helped me once. Figure I owe it forward. Martha pulled her gloves back on. Also because Darius Morse is a cancer on this territory, and I'm tired of watching him spread. Before Caleb could respond, June appeared in the doorway, her face white. Mr. Ward, something's wrong. He was moving before she finished speaking, Martha on his heels. Inside they found Evelyn sitting up in bed, her good hand pressed to her stomach, her face twisted in pain. The bleeding won't stop, she gasped. After the baby, it was... But now it's worse and I can't... Martha took one look and started issuing orders. June, boil water. Millie, bring me every clean cloth you can find. Sadie, take your baby sister outside. The girls scattered. Caleb stood frozen, memories crashing over him, his wife bleeding, the midwife's grim face, the smell of copper and death. Ward, Martha's sharp voice cut through the panic. I need you focused. Can you do that? He forced himself to breathe. Yes. Then help me get her lying down. We need to pack the bleeding and hope it clots. The next hour was brutal. Martha worked with the efficiency of someone who'd delivered babies and tended wounds in isolated homesteads where help was days away. Evelyn bit down on a leather strap to keep from screaming, her body rigid with pain. Caleb held her shoulders steady while Martha did what needed doing and tried not to remember another woman bleeding in his arms. By the time the bleeding finally slowed, Evelyn was unconscious again, her face the color of old snow. Martha washed her hands in the basin and looked at Caleb with grim eyes. She's weak, lost too much blood. And if that bastard husband of hers was forcing himself on her days after giving birth, she didn't finish the thought. She needs rest, real rest, and probably a doctor, though I don't know one who'd come out here knowing Darius Morse is involved. Caleb stared down at Evelyn's motionless form. She can't go back to him. No, Martha agreed. She can't. But the law says otherwise. Then the law is wrong. Being right doesn't stop bullets, Ward. Martha moved to the window, looking out at the empty prairie. Darius will come. Maybe today, maybe tomorrow. But he'll come, and he'll have the sheriff backing him. What's your plan? Caleb had been asking himself the same question all night. I don't know yet. Well, you better figure it out fast. Martha turned back to him. Because in about 2 days, this is going to get very ugly, and those girls deserve better than watching their mother dragged back to hell while you stand there helpless. The words hit like stones, hard and true. There might be one option, Caleb said slowly. The federal judge makes a circuit through the territory twice a year. He was in Silver Creek last month, which means he's due back in about 6 weeks. Martha's expression sharpened. You think he'd hear an appeal? I think he's the only authority higher than Sheriff Calhoun, and I think Darius Morse's story might not hold up under federal scrutiny if someone's willing to testify. Who? You? Martha shook her head. You're one man with no witnesses and a reputation for being half crazy from grief. Your word against Darius, the sheriff, and half the town, that's not a winning case. Then we find witnesses. Someone in Silver Creek saw what happened yesterday. Someone must know the truth about how Darius treats his family. Knowing and testifying are two different things. Martha's voice was bleak. People are afraid, and they should be. Darius Morse doesn't forget grudges. They were interrupted by the sound of more hoofbeats. Caleb grabbed his rifle and moved to the window, then relaxed slightly. It was Morris, the shopkeeper from town, driving a small wagon. He pulled up to the cabin and climbed down slowly, his thin frame nervous. Mr. Ward, I brought supplies, medicine, bandages, some food for the girls. He glanced around as if expecting Darius to materialize from the heat shimmer. Figured you might need them. Caleb stepped outside. That's generous, Morris. How much do I owe you? Nothing. Morris began unloading boxes. Consider it payment for doing what the rest of us were too coward to do. His voice dropped. I saw everything yesterday. Saw Darius kick her while she was down. Saw him threaten to finish her. And I stood there. You helped, Caleb reminded him. You gave me medicine. I helped after, when it was safe. When he wasn't looking. Morris's shame was palpable. My wife was furious with me. Said if I was any kind of man, I would have stopped him before you had to. Martha appeared in the doorway. You here to help or just feel guilty? Morris straightened his spine. Both, but mostly help. He pulled an envelope from his pocket. I wrote down everything I saw yesterday. Dates, times, details. And I got my wife to do the same. It's not much, but if you're planning to fight this legal, we are, Caleb said, taking the envelope. Thank you. There's more. Morris glanced back toward town. The preacher's been going around collecting stories about Evelyn's family, her mother's madness, her first husband's complaints, all the worst gossip. He's building a case that she's unfit, that Darius was just trying to control a dangerous woman. That's a lie, Martha snapped. Of course it's a lie. But it's a lie with 20 years of rumors backing it up. Morris wiped sweat from his forehead. Folks remember Evelyn's mother. Remember her screaming in the streets before they took her away? And Darius has been real careful to make sure everyone knows his wife has spells and difficulties. Been laying groundwork for years. Caleb felt the trap closing. Darius Morse hadn't just been beating his wife, he'd been building a narrative, making sure that if she ever tried to leave, if anyone ever tried to help her, the town would side with him. The poor, patient husband dealing with a mad wife and her cursed children. It was clever, and it was working. Then we break the narrative, Caleb said quietly. How? Morris looked genuinely curious. Caleb thought of June's old eyes, of Millie's flinch, of Sadie asking if he was going to hit her, of Evelyn bleeding in his bed, too weak to stand. By making sure everyone sees the truth, not the story Darius tells, but the evidence he left on his wife's body and his daughter's souls. Martha's expression shifted to something like respect. That's a dangerous game, Ward. So is doing nothing. Morris finished unloading and climbed back onto his wagon. There's one more thing. Darius has been talking to some of the rougher men in the territory, offering money to anyone willing to help him recover his property. Last I heard, he'd gathered about 15 men. An army, Caleb said flatly, remembering Darius's threat from yesterday. Close enough, and they're planning to ride out here tomorrow at dawn. Morris met Caleb's eyes. I probably shouldn't be telling you this. If Darius finds out, he won't hear it from me. Morris nodded and drove away, his wagon leaving twin tracks in the dust. Martha and Caleb stood in the yard watching him go. The sun was climbing toward noon, the heat becoming oppressive. In the distance, buzzards circled something dead. "Tomorrow at dawn," Martha said. "That gives us maybe 18 hours to prepare." "Us? You think I'm leaving now? I told you, I know how to shoot." Martha's smile was grim. "Besides, I've wanted an excuse to put Darius Morse down for years. This is as good as any." Despite everything, Caleb felt something close to gratitude. "I appreciate it. Don't thank me yet. We might all be dead by tomorrow night." Martha headed for her horse. "I'm going back to my place to get ammunition and supplies. I'll be back before dark. You should use the time to fortify this place and figure out how to keep 4 little girls safe when the shooting starts." She rode off, leaving Caleb alone with his thoughts and the sound of June singing softly to Rosie inside the cabin. Tomorrow at dawn. 18 hours to turn a half-finished ranch into a defensible position. 18 hours to prepare for a siege he had no business trying to win. 18 hours to figure out how to keep his promise to 4 frightened children and their broken mother. Caleb looked at the cabin, the walls he'd built for a family that never came, the rooms he'd left unfinished because hope had died with his wife. Now those walls had to hold against 15 men with guns and hate in their hearts. He thought about his wife, about the promises he'd made at her grave, that he'd never love again, never risk the pain of losing someone, never let the world touch him. Yesterday, he'd broken those promises. And somehow, standing in the brutal summer heat with the weight of 5 lives pressing against his conscience, Caleb Ward didn't regret it. He went inside to check on Evelyn and start preparing for war. The afternoon sun turned the prairie into a furnace. Caleb worked with methodical precision, boarding up windows on the cabin's most vulnerable sides, stacking water barrels where they'd provide both cover and necessity, checking his ammunition stores with the grim calculation of a man preparing for the inevitable. He had maybe 100 rounds for his rifle, another 50 for the old Navy Colt his father had carried in the war. Against 15 men, it wasn't nearly enough, but it would have to be. June watched from the doorway, Rosie sleeping against her shoulder. Her eyes tracked every movement, cataloging, assessing. She'd been quiet since Morris left, absorbing the reality of what was coming. "How many men did he say?" Her voice was steady, too steady. Caleb paused, hammer in hand. 15. "And there's just you." "Martha's coming back. She knows how to handle a rifle." June's expression didn't change. 2 people against 15. Those aren't good odds." "No," Caleb admitted. "They're not. So we're going to die." It wasn't a question, just a flat statement of fact from a child who'd already calculated the mathematics of violence. Caleb set down the hammer and crossed to her. "I don't plan on dying, and I sure as hell don't plan on letting anyone hurt you or your sisters." Papa always said plans don't matter when the bullets start flying. June shifted Rosie to her other shoulder. "He was in the war, talked about it when he was drinking, said the only thing that matters is who's willing to kill and who hesitates." The words came out clinical, detached, and Caleb felt his chest tighten. What kind of childhood had this girl endured, listening to her father's drunken war stories while learning to read violence like other children learned their letters? "Your father's right about one thing," Caleb said quietly. "Hesitation can get you killed, but so can being reckless. The trick is knowing when to stand and when to think." "And which are you planning to do tomorrow?" "Both." Caleb met her eyes. "I'm going to stand my ground, but I'm also going to think very carefully about keeping you all alive." June studied his face for a long moment. Then, so quietly, he almost missed it. "I know how to load a rifle. Papa made me practice in case the ranch was ever attacked. Said even useless girls could be ammunition loaders." The casual cruelty of it landed like a blow. "June, I'm just saying I can help. I'm not asking to shoot, but I can load. Keep the guns ready while you and Mrs. Hayes are firing." Her chin lifted with desperate dignity. "I won't be useless." Caleb crouched down to her level, careful not to disturb the sleeping baby. "You could never be useless. You're 10 years old and you've already survived more than most grown men. You've kept your sisters alive, taken care of your mother, and you're still standing. That's not useless, June. That's extraordinary." Her eyes filled with tears she refused to let fall. "But it's not enough, is it? Because tomorrow they're coming, and being strong won't stop bullets." "No," Caleb said honestly. It won't, but it means you've got the kind of spine that doesn't break, and that counts for something. The sound of riders approaching cut through the conversation. Caleb was on his feet instantly, rifle in hand, positioning himself between June and the door. But it was Martha returning, and she wasn't alone. 3 more riders followed her into the yard, all women, all wearing the weathered determination of frontier survivors. Caleb recognized them. Sarah Chen, who ran a small farm east of town with her sister. Ruth Blackwood, a former dance hall girl who'd bought her own homestead with saved wages. And old Margaret Finch, who'd buried 2 husbands and swore she'd never answer to a man again. Martha dismounted and started unloading saddlebags full of ammunition. Figured we could use more hands. These ladies volunteered when I told them what was happening. Sarah Chen was already surveying the cabin with a tactical eye. Windows need better coverage on the north side, and you'll want someone positioned in the barn with a clear line to the approach road. You military? Caleb asked, surprised. Father was a colonel. Taught me and my sister to shoot before we could read. Sarah's smile was sharp. Figured those lessons might as well be useful. Ruth Blackwood was checking the water supply. We'll need more. If they decide to wait us out instead of rushing, we could be here for days. Margaret Finch, despite her age, moved with surprising speed to help Martha unload. Brought medical supplies too, bandages, laudanum, whiskey, just in case. Caleb stared at these 5 women, strangers mostly, who'd ridden out to help defend people they barely knew against a man who terrified the entire territory. Why? Because we're tired, Martha said bluntly. Tired of watching men like Darius Morse beat their wives and get away with it. Tired of sheriffs who look the other way. Tired of being told it's none of our business when someone's being murdered slowly in plain sight. I had a daughter once, Margaret added, her voice rough with old grief. Her husband killed her, beat her to death over a burned roast. Sheriff ruled it an accident, said she must have fallen down the stairs. Her eyes were hard as flint. Nobody helped her. Nobody stood up. I've regretted that every day since. Ruth nodded. I spent 5 years in a dance hall being treated like property. When I finally saved enough to buy my freedom, you know what the marshal told me? That I should be grateful for the work. That women like me don't get to complain. She checked her rifle with practiced hands. Well, I'm complaining now. Sarah simply said, my sister was engaged to a man who hit her. When she tried to break it off, he broke her arm. Said it was a warning about what happened to women who didn't honor their commitments. Her jaw tightened. She married him anyway because everyone said she had to. She hung herself 3 months later. The weight of their collective pain settled over the yard like a shroud. These weren't just women helping a stranger. They were fighting every man who'd ever raised a hand, every lawman who'd looked away, every preacher who'd preached submission while ignoring the blood. I'm grateful, Caleb said quietly. More than I can say. Save the gratitude, Martha replied. We've got work to do. They spent the next hours transforming the ranch into something defensible. Sarah positioned shooters to cover overlapping fields of fire. Ruth and Margaret reinforced the weakest walls with furniture and supply crates. Martha showed June how to organize ammunition for quick reloading, treating the girl with the same respect she'd give a fellow soldier. Caleb found himself working alongside women who moved with competence and purpose, who didn't need instructions or coddling, who simply saw what needed doing and did it. It was humbling and inspiring in equal measure. Inside the cabin, Evelyn drifted in and out of fevered sleep. Caleb checked on her periodically, changing bandages, forcing water between her cracked lips. She woke once, as he was adjusting her position, and gripped his wrist with surprising strength. The girls, she whispered. If something happens, nothing's going to happen. Caleb. The use of his first name stopped him. Her eyes were glassy with fever, but lucid. Promise me. If it comes down to choosing between me and them, you choose them. It won't come to that. Promise me. Her grip tightened. I'm already broken. But they still have a chance. Promise you'll get them out. Caleb looked at this woman who'd been beaten down her entire adult life, who'd been told she was cursed and mad and worthless, who was now planning her own death to save her daughters. The strength in that kind of love, the terrible, beautiful strength of it, hit him like a physical force. I promise I'll keep them safe, he said, but I'm keeping you safe too. All of you make it out. Or none of us do. Evelyn's eyes filled with tears. Why do you care so much? Because you deserve to be cared about. Caleb smoothed the sweat-damp hair from her forehead. And because someone has to stand up and say that what's being done to you is wrong. Might as well be me. She fell back asleep before she could respond, but her hand remained wrapped around his wrist, a tentative anchor to the possibility that maybe, just maybe, the world held more than cruelty. As the sun began its descent toward the horizon, painting the prairie in shades of copper and gold, the defenders gathered in the main room. Caleb had moved Evelyn to the back bedroom with the girls, giving them the most protected position in the cabin. Martha spread a rough map on the table. Darius will probably come from the main road here. It's the most direct route, and he'll want to make a show of it, riding in with his army like he's got legal authority. Which he thinks he does, Sarah added. Sheriff Calhoun's backing means he'll feel legitimate, righteous, even. So we make him doubt that righteousness. Caleb traced the approach to the cabin. We let him ride in close enough to talk. Give him a chance to turn around. Ruth snorted. Men like Darius Morse don't turn around. They escalate. I know, but I want witnesses to say we tried peace first. When this gets to a federal judge, and it will, I want the law on our side. Assuming we survive long enough for a judge to hear the case, Margaret muttered. We will. Caleb's certainty surprised even himself. Because we're fighting for something real. Darius is fighting for pride and property. That's a losing proposition. Pretty words, Martha said, but bullets don't care about moral high ground. No, Caleb agreed, but we do. And that matters. They continued planning into the evening, working out fields of fire, fallback positions, contingencies if the cabin was breached. June sat in the corner with her sisters, pretending not to listen while absorbing every word. As full darkness fell, someone knocked on the door, a tentative sound that made everyone reach for their weapons. Caleb moved to answer it and found a young man standing in the dirt yard, his horse lathered with sweat. He couldn't have been more than 17, rail-thin and shaking. Mr. Ward? His voice cracked. I'm Thomas. Thomas Riley. I need to talk to you. Caleb recognized him, the son of one of the local farmers, a quiet boy who worked odd jobs around town. What is it? Thomas glanced over his shoulder nervously, as if expecting pursuit. I was there yesterday, in town. I saw everything Mr. Morse did, and I wanted you to know I think what you did was right, standing up for Mrs. Morse and the children. That's appreciated, son. But if you're here to offer testimony, I am. Thomas straightened his spine with visible effort. But there's more. Mr. Morse came by our farm today, tried to recruit my father to ride with him tomorrow, said it was civic duty, recovering stolen property. The boy's face twisted with disgust. My father told him to get off our land, said any man who beats his wife in the street doesn't deserve to call himself a husband. Hope flickered in Caleb's chest. Your father willing to testify to that? Yes, sir, and he's not the only one. There are others in town who are disgusted by what Mr. Morse has been doing. They're just... Thomas struggled for words. They're scared. He's got the sheriff and the preacher and half the businessmen on his side. Going against him means going against the whole power structure. I understand. Fear is reasonable. Caleb studied the boy. But you came anyway. Yes, sir. Because watching Mrs. Morse's head hit that ground, Thomas's voice broke. I have sisters, younger sisters, and I kept thinking, what if someone did that to them? What if everyone just watched? Your father raised you right, Thomas Riley. The boy flushed. He taught me that strength is supposed to protect, not dominate, that men who hit women are cowards no matter what the law says. He pulled a folded paper from his pocket. I wrote down everything I saw, times, details, what Mr. Morse said. It's not much, but it's enough. Caleb took the paper. Thank you. Thomas nodded and turned to leave, then paused. Mr. Ward, there's something else. Mr. Morse has been drinking all day. By tomorrow morning, he'll be half drunk and fully raging. He's not going to be reasonable. He's not going to negotiate. I know. Then you should also know. He told the men riding with him that there's a bonus for whoever brings Mrs. Morse back alive. But he didn't say anything about keeping her unharmed. Thomas met Caleb's eyes. He's planning to make an example of her, to show the whole territory what happens to wives who run. The implications hung in the air, ugly and clear. "Get home, son," Caleb said quietly. "Get home and keep your head down. If anyone asks, you were never here." Thomas rode off into the darkness, and Caleb stood in the yard for a long moment, letting the night air cool his rage. Behind him, Martha appeared in the doorway. "You heard?" "Every word." Her expression was grim. "We're not giving her back." "No," Caleb agreed. "We're not. Even if it costs us everything. Even then." Martha smiled, a fierce, terrible expression. "Good, because I'm tired of living in a world where men like Darius Morse win." They went back inside, where the defenders were settling in for what would likely be a sleepless night. Caleb checked the girls one last time and found them curled together in the back bedroom, June still awake and watching the door. "You should sleep," he said gently. "Can't." June's admission was stark. "Every time I close my eyes, I see Papa's face, hear him coming." Caleb sat on the edge of the bed. "He's not here yet." "But he will be. Tomorrow. And he's going to be so angry." Her voice dropped to a whisper. "You don't know what he's like when he's truly angry, what he's capable of." "I can imagine." "No." June shook her head. "You can't, because you're a good man. Good men can't really imagine what evil looks like when it takes off its mask." The observation was devastating in its accuracy. "Maybe not," Caleb admitted, "but I know how to fight. And I know that sometimes the only way to stop evil is to stand in its way and refuse to move. And if it kills you for standing, then at least I stood." June processed this in silence. Then, so quietly, he almost missed it. "Mama thinks she's going to die tomorrow. She told me to take my sisters and run if things go bad. Said to leave her and save ourselves." Caleb's jaw tightened. "That's not going to happen." "How can you be sure?" "Because I'm not in the business of abandoning people anymore." He met her eyes. 6 years ago, I watched my wife die and couldn't do anything to stop it. Couldn't save her. Couldn't save our son. I've lived with that helplessness every day since. But tomorrow?" He paused. "Tomorrow I have a choice. I can let fear win, or I can stand and fight, and I choose fighting." June studied his face with those old, old eyes. "You really mean that?" "I do." "Then I'm helping, loading rifles like I said." "June, I'm not asking permission." Her voice hardened with determination. "This is my family, my mama, my sisters. I've spent my whole life watching men hurt us and feeling powerless. But tomorrow, I can do something. Even if it's just keeping the guns loaded, that's something." Caleb wanted to argue, wanted to protect this child from having to participate in violence, but he also recognized the steel in her spine, the need to have agency in her own survival. Taking that from her would be its own kind of cruelty. "All right," he said finally, "but you stay in the back room with your sisters. You load, pass the weapons forward, and if I tell you to take them and run, you do it. No arguments." June nodded. It wasn't quite agreement, but it was as close as they'd get. Caleb stood and moved to the window, looking out at the darkness. The moon was rising, painting the prairie in shades of silver and shadow. Somewhere out there, Darius Morse was gathering his men, stoking his rage, preparing to reclaim what he considered his property. The night stretched long and tense. The women took turns sleeping and keeping watch. Caleb dozed in a chair, his rifle across his lap, jerking awake at every creak of settling timber or gust of wind. Around 3 a.m, Evelyn woke again, her fever broken, her eyes clearer than they'd been since the beating. She found Caleb keeping watch by her door and struggled to sit up. "Let me help," Caleb said, moving to support her back with pillows. Evelyn looked around the dark room, at the shapes of sleeping women, at the rifles stacked ready by the windows. "It's really happening. He's really coming." "Yes." "And you're all preparing to die for me." Her voice cracked. "People you don't even know, risking everything for a woman who's been called cursed and mad her entire life." "You're not cursed, Evelyn." "How do you know?" The question wasn't challenging, it was genuinely desperate. "How do you know I'm not exactly what everyone says?" That my mother's madness isn't in me, that I don't deserve... Stop. Caleb's voice was firm but gentle. I know because I've seen what real evil looks like. And it's not you. It's not mental illness or bad blood or any of the lies men tell to justify their cruelty. Real evil is Darius Morse beating you unconscious in the street while people watched. Real evil is a system that calls that legal. Evelyn's tears came silent and endless. I wanted to die so many times, prayed for it, begged for it. The only thing that stopped me was the girls. They needed someone, even a broken someone. You're not broken. You're surviving. What's the difference? Caleb thought of his own 6 years of numbness, of grief so deep it had calcified into a kind of living death. The difference is that broken things can be mended, and surviving means you're still here to be mended. And if tomorrow, we're going to make it through tomorrow. Caleb surprised himself with the certainty in his voice. All of us. And then we're going to make sure Darius Morse faces real justice, federal justice, where his bought sheriff can't interfere. You can't promise that. No, Caleb admitted, but I can promise I'll fight like hell to make it true. Evelyn reached out and took his hand, her grip weak but intentional. Why are you doing this? Really? I'm nobody. My daughters are nobody. We're not worth You're worth everything, Caleb interrupted. Every person is worth fighting for, worth standing up for. And maybe I've been dead for 6 years, but something about you and your girls reminded me what it means to be alive, to give a damn about something other than my own grief. They sat in silence for a moment, hands clasped, two broken people finding unexpected strength in shared purpose. If we survive this, Evelyn said quietly, I don't know what comes next. I don't know how to be anything other than scared. Then we'll figure it out together, one day at a time. I've never had anyone offer to figure things out with me. Always just been told what to do and punished when I failed. Then maybe it's time for something different. Evelyn's laugh was shaky, but real. Different. Yes, I think I'd like to try different. As dawn began to lighten the eastern horizon, turning the sky from black to deep blue to pale gold, the defenders took their positions. Martha and Sarah stationed themselves at windows with clear views of the approach road. Ruth covered the north side. Margaret positioned herself in the barn with a rifle and a good vantage point. Caleb stood on the porch, his rifle in hand, watching the sun rise over the prairie. The morning was already warm, promising another day of brutal heat. In the distance, a dust cloud appeared on the horizon. Riders, moving fast. Behind him, June emerged with Rosie in her arms, Sadie and Millie clinging to her skirts. They're coming, aren't they? Yes. How many? Caleb counted the dust trails. Looks like 18, maybe 20. June's face paled, but she didn't flinch. We're still going to fight? We're still going to fight. Then I'll get the ammunition ready. She disappeared inside, and Caleb took a deep breath. The sun was clearing the horizon now, painting everything in shades of gold and blood. It was beautiful and terrible at once, the kind of morning that made you grateful to be alive even as you prepared for death. The riders took shape as they approached, Darius Morse at the head, his bulk unmistakable even at a distance. Sheriff Calhoun rode beside him, a star glinting on his vest. Behind them came the hired guns, rough men who did violence for money and called it justice. And at the back, being dragged on a rope behind one of the horses, was Thomas Riley. The boy was stumbling, his face bloody, his hands bound. He'd been caught, either leaving Caleb's ranch or sometime during the night, and now he was being used as a message. Caleb's hands tightened on his rifle. This was what Darius Morse did. He took anything good and twisted it into a weapon. Took a brave boy's testimony and turned it into a prop for his own authority. The riders stopped about 50 yards from the cabin, spreading out in a loose line. Darius dismounted slowly, deliberately, like a man who had all the time in the world. He pulled Thomas forward by the rope and let him collapse in the dust. Ward, Darius's voice carried across the prairie. I've come for what's mine. Caleb stepped off the porch, his rifle lowered but ready. Behind him, he could feel the women at the windows, their weapons trained on the men in the yard. This was it, the moment that would determine whether they lived or died, whether justice meant anything or whether power would win like it always did. He looked at Darius Morse, at the man who'd beaten his wife unconscious, who'd terrified his daughters, who'd turned violence into a way of life. and felt something settle in his chest. Not rage, not fear, just absolute, unshakable certainty. "She's not property," Caleb called back. "And she's not leaving." Darius grinned. "Then I guess we're going to have a problem." The sun climbed higher, heat already building. In the terrible silence that followed, Caleb could hear his own heartbeat, steady and sure. The siege had begun. Darius kicked Thomas hard in the ribs, and the boy's cry of pain cut across the morning air like a knife. Sheriff Calhoun sat his horse with studied indifference, his hand resting on his gun belt in a posture of casual authority. "That's what happens to people who lie for you, Ward," Darius called out. "This boy came to my camp last night spouting nonsense about testimony and witness statements. Tried to tell me I was in the wrong." He kicked Thomas again. Had to correct his thinking. Caleb's jaw clenched, but he kept his voice steady. "Let him go. Your quarrel's with me." "My quarrel is with anyone who thinks they can take my wife and children." Darius gestured broadly at the cabin. "Sheriff Calhoun here has legal papers saying Evelyn Morse is my property under territorial law. Says those girls are mine too. That makes what you did kidnapping." "I didn't kidnap anyone. I stopped a man from beating his wife to death in the street." Sheriff Calhoun shifted in his saddle. "That's a matter of interpretation, Ward. Family discipline is a husband's right. You interfering makes you the criminal here." "Family discipline?" Caleb's voice went hard. "Is that what you call cracking a woman's skull open on the ground?" "I call it none of your damn business," Calhoun replied. "Now, you can make this easy and send Mrs. Morse and her daughters out, or we can make it hard. Your choice." Behind Caleb, the cabin door opened. He heard footsteps on the porch, and his heart sank. This was exactly what he'd been trying to prevent. But when he glanced back, it wasn't June or one of the other girls. It was Evelyn. She was barely able to stand, one hand gripping the porch rail for support, her face still bruised and swollen. The bandage on her head was stark white against her dark hair. But she stood there, back straight despite the pain, and when she spoke, her voice carried clearly across the yard. "I'm not going back." The words landed like stones. Darius's face went purple with rage. "The hell you're not. You're my wife. Those are my children. You don't get to decide." "I do." Evelyn's voice shook but didn't break. "I'm deciding, right here, right now. I'm not going back to you, ever." "You crazy bitch," Darius snarled. "You think you have rights? You think the law cares what you want?" He turned to Calhoun. Tell her she belongs to me." Sheriff Calhoun cleared his throat. "Mrs. Morse, under territorial law, a wife's place is with her husband. These difficulties between you and Mr. Morse are private matters, best resolved at home. My home is anywhere he isn't." Evelyn's legs were trembling, but she didn't sit down. "He's beaten me for 6 years, broken my bones, choked me unconscious, forced himself on me 3 days after I gave birth. And you," she pointed at Calhoun, "you told me that was my duty, that I should submit and be grateful." Murmurs rippled through the hired men. Some looked uncomfortable. Others just looked bored. "That's lies and hysteria," Darius shouted. "Everyone knows you're unstable, just like your mama. Bad blood and worse breeding. I've been patient with you, tried to help you, and this is how you repay me?" "Patient?" Evelyn's laugh was bitter. "You kicked me in the stomach when I was 6 months pregnant with Sadie because dinner was cold. You broke my wrist for talking to the shopkeeper. You told our daughters they were worthless burdens and made them watch while you—" Her voice cracked, but she forced herself to continue. "I am not crazy. I am not cursed. I am abused, and I am done." The silence that followed was absolute. Even the hired guns had stopped their restless shifting. This wasn't what they'd signed up for. They'd been told they were recovering a stolen wife, not confronting a woman brave enough to name her torture in broad daylight. Darius's hand moved to his gun. "You've been listening to this hermit fill your head with ideas, but I'm taking you back, Evelyn. You and the girls. And when I do, you're going to learn what happens to wives who embarrass their husbands in public." "No," Caleb's voice cut through the threat. "She's not going anywhere with you. You got no legal standing, Ward, no authority. Just a rifle and some fool notion of playing hero." Darius gestured to the men behind him. "I've got 18 armed men and the law on my side. You've got what? A few women who should have stayed home where they belong? From the window, Martha's voice rang out cold and clear. This woman stayed home for 15 years while my husband beat me. When I finally fought back, you know what happened? He died. And I didn't hang for it because even the judge could see the bruises. Sarah Chen's voice came from another window. My sister killed herself because men like you told her she had no choice, that she had to honor her commitments even when those commitments were killing her. Ruth Blackwood spoke next. I spent 5 years being treated like property, like I had no right to say no, no right to leave, no right to exist except for what men wanted from me. So you can threaten all you want, Darius Morse, but we're not backing down. Darius looked around at the cabin, at the rifle barrels visible in the windows, at Caleb standing steady on the porch. His confidence flickered for just a moment. This is your last chance, Ward. Send them out, or we come in shooting. Then you better start shooting, Caleb replied quietly, because they're not leaving. Sheriff Calhoun held up a hand. Now, hold on. Nobody needs to die here today. Ward, you seem like a reasonable man. Why don't we talk this through? Maybe we can find a compromise. There's no compromise with abuse, Caleb said. Either Evelyn and her daughters stay free, or you have to go through me to take them. Those are the only two options. You're making a mistake. Calhoun's voice took on a warning edge. I've got legal authority here. If you resist, you're breaking territorial law. That's a hanging offense. Then I guess you better make sure you can prove I resisted. Caleb's eyes swept over the hired guns. Because every man here is a witness, and when this gets to a federal judge, and it will, they're going to have to testify about what they saw today, about whether they watched an unarmed woman get dragged back to her abuser, or whether they had the courage to say no. Several of the hired men shifted uncomfortably. They'd been told this would be quick and legal. Nobody had mentioned federal judges or witness testimony. Federal judge won't care about a domestic dispute, Darius scoffed, but there was uncertainty in his voice now. Won't he? Caleb pulled the papers from his pocket. Morris's testimony, Thomas's written account, the statements Martha had collected. Because I've got written testimony from multiple witnesses about what you did in town 2 days ago. About how you beat your wife unconscious in the street while people watched. About how you kicked her while she was down. About the threats you made. Those are lies. Then you'll have no problem answering for them in federal court. Caleb's voice was steel. But you're going to have to keep Evelyn and her daughters alive and unmarked long enough for that court date. Can you do that, Morse? Can you keep your fist to yourself for 6 weeks? Darius's face went from purple to nearly black with rage. You self-righteous son of a... He lunged forward, and everything happened at once. Caleb raised his rifle. Martha and Sarah did the same from the windows. The hired guns reached for their weapons, uncertain whether to draw or wait. And into that frozen moment of potential violence, a new sound cut through the tension. Hoofbeats. Multiple riders coming fast from the direction of town. Everyone turned to look. A group of riders crested the rise, not hired guns or Darius's men, but townspeople. Caleb recognized the butcher, the livery owner, 2 of the farmers from the eastern homesteads. And at their head, riding a gray mare with surprising grace, was an elderly man in a black coat, Preacher Walsh. But he wasn't alone. Behind him rode someone else, a lean man in his 50s wearing a dark suit and a silver star on his vest that caught the sunlight. Not a sheriff's star, a federal marshal's badge. The entire dynamic of the standoff shifted in an instant. What the hell is this? Darius demanded, but his voice had lost its certainty. Preacher Walsh dismounted slowly, his movement stiff with age. I couldn't sleep last night, he said without preamble. Kept thinking about what I saw in town 2 days ago, about what I didn't do. He looked directly at Darius. I've been writing testimony for you, Morse, collecting stories about Evelyn's mother, about the family's supposed curse, making you look like a long-suffering husband dealing with a mad wife. That's right, Darius said, some confidence returning. You've seen how she is. Unstable, just like... I lied. Walsh's voice cut through the bluster. I wrote what you wanted because you paid me to, because you threatened to ruin my church if I didn't. But I'm done lying. He pulled papers from his coat. This is the real testimony about what I've witnessed over the years, the bruises I pretended not to see, The fear in those little girls' eyes, the way Evelyn would flinch whenever you raised your voice. "You senile old fool, nobody's going to believe—" "I will," said the man with the federal marshal's badge. He dismounted and walked forward with calm authority. "I'm Marshal James Tucker, federal law enforcement. Got a wire yesterday from a concerned citizen about possible criminal activity in Silver Creek. Decided to ride out and investigate." Sheriff Calhoun's face went pale. "Marshal Tucker, this is a local matter, territorial jurisdiction. You got no cause to—" "I've got cause when citizens report kidnapping and conspiracy." Tucker's eyes swept over the scene with practiced assessment. "Though from what I'm hearing seems like the real crime might be happening in plain sight and being called legal. This woman is my property under territorial law." Darius's desperation was showing now. "She's a person under federal law," Tucker replied calmly. "And persons have rights, even in territories, especially when there's evidence of assault, battery, and unlawful imprisonment." "I never imprisoned her." "No?" Tucker looked at Evelyn, at her bruised face and bandaged head. "Ma'am, did your husband prevent you from leaving your home?" Evelyn's voice was barely a whisper. "He said if I ever tried to leave, he'd kill me and the girls. That nobody would believe me. That the law was on his side." "Did he strike you?" "Every day, sometimes multiple times a day." "Did he force sexual relations after you'd given birth?" Evelyn's face flushed with shame, but she nodded. 3 days after Rosie was born, I was still bleeding. He said it was his right. The hired guns were backing their horses away now, wanting no part of what was becoming a federal case. Even Sheriff Calhoun looked like he wanted to disappear. Marshal Tucker turned to Darius. "Mr. Morse, under federal law, I'm placing you under investigation for aggravated assault, spousal abuse, and credible threat of murder. You're going to need to come with me back to the territorial capital to answer some questions." "This is insane," Darius bellowed. "She's lying. She's crazy. Everyone knows." "I know what I see," Tucker interrupted. "I see a woman who looks like she's been beaten within an inch of her life. I see 4 terrified children. I see testimony from multiple witnesses. And I see a man who brought an armed mob to terrorize civilians." His hand moved to his own gun. "Now you can come peaceful, or we can make this difficult. Your choice." Darius looked around wildly, searching for support. But the hired guns were gone, melted away like morning fog. Sheriff Calhoun was staring at his saddle horn, suddenly very interested in the leather work. The townspeople who'd ridden out with Tucker were watching with a mixture of shame and relief. "This isn't over," Darius snarled. "I'll appeal. I'll get lawyers. You'll do whatever the federal court tells you to do," Tucker said flatly. "Now dismount and hand over your weapon." For a moment, Caleb thought Darius might actually fight. The man's hand hovered over his gun, his face twisted with rage and humiliation. But Tucker was faster and calmer, his own weapon already drawn and level. "Don't make this worse than it already is," Tucker said quietly. Darius dismounted with jerky, furious movements. He yanked his gun from its holster and threw it to the ground. "You're all going to regret this, every single one of you. When I prove she's lying, when I show everyone what she really is, then you'll have your day in court," Tucker said. "But until then, you're under federal custody." He gestured to 2 of the townsmen. "Help me secure the prisoner." As they moved to comply, Darius made one last desperate move. He broke free from the first man's grip and lunged toward the porch, toward Evelyn, his hands reaching like claws. "If I can't have you, nobody will." He'd pulled a knife from somewhere, a hidden blade, small but deadly. He was fast despite his bulk, and for a split second the blade was arcing toward Evelyn's throat. 3 things happened simultaneously. Caleb pivoted, rifle coming up. From inside the cabin, June screamed, "Mama!" And Evelyn, who'd spent 6 years being beaten into submission, who'd been told she was weak and worthless and cursed, Evelyn stepped aside. Not a large movement, not dramatic. Just a simple, decisive step to the left that made Darius's lunge miss by inches. He stumbled on the porch steps, off balance, and that's when Caleb's rifle barrel came down hard on his wrist. The knife clattered to the wood. Darius howled in pain and fury. And then Marshal Tucker was there, yanking Darius's arms behind his back and snapping iron cuffs around his wrists with practiced efficiency. "That's assault with a deadly weapon on multiple witnesses," Tucker said grimly. "Federal offense. You just made this real simple, Morse. Darius was screaming now, incoherent rage and threats spilling out in a torrent. The townsman dragged him away from the porch, his boots leaving drag marks in the dust. Evelyn stood frozen, staring at the knife on the porch. Her whole body was shaking. "You moved," Caleb said quietly, lowering his rifle. "When he came at you, you moved." "I did." Evelyn's voice was wondering, like she couldn't quite believe it herself. "I saw the knife, and I thought, I'm not dying for him. Not anymore." The cabin door burst open, and June came flying out, followed by her sisters. They crashed into their mother in a tangle of arms and tears, all talking at once. Evelyn sank down to the porch and gathered them close. And for the first time since Caleb had met her, she was crying not from pain, but from something that looked almost like hope. Marshal Tucker approached the porch, his expression softer now. "Mrs. Morse, I'm going to need you to come to the territorial capital and give formal testimony. But that can wait until you're healed up a bit. For now, is there somewhere safe you can stay?" "Here," Caleb said before Evelyn could answer. "She and her daughters stay here." Tucker looked between them, assessing. "You related to Mrs. Morse?" "No." "Planning to marry her?" "That's not—" Caleb stopped, chose his words carefully. "I'm offering shelter. Nothing more, nothing less." "Just shelter?" Tucker's skepticism was evident. "Just shelter," Caleb confirmed. "She needs time to heal. The girls need stability. I've got space and supplies." Tucker considered this. "All right, but understand, if there's any question of impropriety, any suggestion that Mrs. Morse was coerced or influenced, there won't be," Evelyn said firmly. She was still sitting on the porch with her daughters clustered around her, but her voice was steady. "Mr. Ward saved my life and asked nothing in return. He's offered me and my children safety when the rest of the world offered nothing. If he's willing to let us stay while I figure out what comes next, I'm grateful for it." Tucker nodded slowly. "Fair enough. I'll be back in about a week to take your formal statement. In the meantime, Sheriff Calhoun—" He turned to where Calhoun still sat his horse, looking like he wanted to be anywhere else. "I'll be having words with the territorial governor about how domestic violence is being handled in this jurisdiction. Might want to refresh yourself on federal law regarding assault and battery." Calhoun's face went red, but he just nodded and turned his horse toward town. The remaining townspeople followed, most looking ashamed, a few looking relieved. Preacher Walsh was the last to leave. He approached the porch and looked at Evelyn with genuine remorse. "I failed you," he said simply. "I knew what was happening and I did nothing. Worse, I helped him build the lie that you were the problem. I'm sorry." Evelyn stared at him for a long moment. Then, "You came today. You brought the marshal. That counts for something." "Not enough, but I'll try to do better." Walsh turned to Caleb. "The boy, Thomas Riley. He's hurt, but he'll live. I'm taking him back to his father." He paused. "That was a brave thing he did. And a brave thing you did, standing up when the rest of us were silent." "Just did what needed doing," Caleb replied. Walsh nodded and mounted his horse. As he rode away, Thomas's limp form supported in front of him, Caleb felt the tension of the last 2 days finally begin to drain. It was over. Not finished. There would be trials and testimony and legal battles. But the immediate threat was gone. Darius was in custody. Evelyn and her daughters were safe. From the windows, the women began to emerge. Martha first, her rifle still in hand, her expression fierce with satisfaction. Sarah and Ruth followed, both looking exhausted but triumphant. Old Margaret came last, wiping tears from her weathered face. "We did it," Ruth said, her voice full of wonder. "We actually did it." "You stood," Martha corrected. "All of you. When it mattered, you stood." They gathered in the yard, these women who'd risked everything for a stranger, and the silence among them was comfortable and earned. They'd faced down a mob and won. Not through violence, though they'd been prepared for it, but through simple, stubborn refusal to let evil win unopposed. Eventually, they began to disperse. Martha and the others had their own homesteads to return to, their own lives to resume. But before they left, each of them stopped to speak to Evelyn. "If you need anything," Sarah said, "you send word." We're neighbors now, Ruth added, and neighbors help each other. Margaret just squeezed Evelyn's hand and nodded, her meaning clear. As the women rode away, Caleb stood in the yard and watched the dust settle. The sun was climbing toward noon, the heat building to brutal levels. He should get Evelyn and the girls inside, out of the worst of it. Should check their supplies, tend to the damage from the standoff, start thinking about the future. Instead, he just stood there, feeling the weight of the last 2 days settle into his bones. He'd broken 6 years of silence, taken on a fight that wasn't his, risked his life and his property for people he barely knew. And somehow, standing in his dusty yard with the summer sun beating down, Caleb Ward felt more alive than he had since the day he'd buried his wife and son. "Mr. Ward?" June's voice pulled him from his thoughts. She was standing in the doorway, Rosie in her arms. "Mama's asking for you." He followed her inside where Evelyn was sitting on the edge of the bed, her daughters clustered around her like satellites. She looked up when he entered, and her eyes were clear despite the bruising. "Thank you," she said simply. "You don't need to." "Yes, I do." Evelyn's voice was firm. "You saved my life. You gave me something I'd forgotten existed. Choice, agency, the right to say no." She paused. "I don't know what happens next. Don't know how to be anything other than afraid. But I know I want to try. Want to learn how to be free." Caleb felt something catch in his throat. "Then we'll figure it out, one day at a time." "Why?" Evelyn asked, echoing the question she'd asked before. "Why do you care so much about what happens to us?" Caleb looked at her, this battered, brave woman who'd survived things that would have broken most people. He looked at June with her old eyes and fierce protectiveness, at Sadie and Millie, slowly learning they didn't have to flinch, at baby Rosie, who'd never know her father's violence. "Because you deserve to be cared about," he said finally, "and because for 6 years I forgot what it meant to be human, to connect, to give a damn about something other than my own pain. You and your daughters reminded me." Evelyn's eyes filled with tears, but she was smiling. "Then I guess we saved each other." It wasn't romantic, wasn't even particularly hopeful. It was just honest, two broken people acknowledging that maybe, together, they could start to heal. Outside, the prairie stretched endless under a ruthless sun. But inside the cabin, 5 people who'd been running from violence finally stopped. And in the stillness that followed, something that felt almost like peace began to take root. The days that followed the standoff settled into a rhythm that felt strange in its ordinariness. Caleb woke each morning to sounds he'd forgotten. Children's voices, the soft murmur of women talking, baby Rosie's cries that gradually became less frightened and more demanding. The cabin that had been a mausoleum for grief slowly transformed into something that resembled a home. Evelyn healed slowly. The visible wounds faded first, the bruises shifting from purple-black to yellow-green, the gash on her head scabbing over and beginning to close. But the invisible wounds, those took longer. She still flinched at sudden sounds, still positioned herself with her back to walls where she could see all the exits, still woke in the night gasping from nightmares where Darius's hands were around her throat. But she was trying. That was what mattered. 3 days after the standoff, she appeared in the kitchen before dawn and found Caleb already making coffee. She moved slowly, still favoring her broken ribs, but her eyes were clearer than he'd seen them. "Couldn't sleep?" Caleb asked quietly, pouring her a cup. "Slept better than I have in years, actually." Evelyn took the coffee with her good hand, the broken wrist still splinted. "That's what woke me up, the absence of fear." They stood in companionable silence, watching through the window as the sky lightened from black to deep blue. The prairie stretched endless, and for once that vastness felt like freedom rather than isolation. "Marshal Tucker is coming today," Evelyn said finally, "to take my testimony." "I know. I'm terrified." Her admission was stark. Not of Darius, he's locked up in the territorial capital, but of having to say it all out loud, having to name every terrible thing and make it official. Caleb set his cup down. "You don't have to do it alone. I can be there. Martha too, if you want." "Would you?" Evelyn looked at him with something like desperation. "I know it's asking a lot, but I don't think I can face that room full of men and their questions without—" "I'll be there," Caleb interrupted gently. "Every minute of it." The relief on her face was profound. She reached out and squeezed his hand, brief, grateful contact that spoke volumes. When Marshal Tucker arrived mid-morning, he brought with him a stenographer and a female witness from town, Mrs. Henderson from the millinery shop. The woman looked uncomfortable but determined. Federal law requires a woman present when taking testimony about marital violence, Tucker explained. Mrs. Henderson volunteered. They set up in the main room, and Caleb positioned himself where Evelyn could see him. June tried to stay, but Evelyn gently sent her outside with her sisters. "This isn't for children's ears," she said softly. "You've heard enough already." What followed was brutal in its clinical precision. Tucker asked questions in a measured, methodical way, and Evelyn answered with a clarity that surprised even herself. She detailed 6 years of escalating violence. The first slap on their wedding night when she'd asked if he loved her. The broken arm when she was pregnant with Sadie. The time he'd held her head underwater in the horse trough until she passed out. The forced relations that left her bleeding and ashamed. The stenographer's pen scratched steadily across the paper. Mrs. Henderson wept silently, her handkerchief pressed to her mouth. Tucker's expression remained neutral, but his jaw tightened with each new revelation. "Did you ever attempt to seek help?" Tucker asked. 3 times. Evelyn's voice was steady, despite the tears on her face. "The first time, I went to Sheriff Calhoun. He told me that marriage vows meant submission, and if I couldn't keep my husband happy, I should expect consequences. The second time I went to Preacher Walsh, he said I needed to pray more, be more obedient. The third time, I tried to leave, took the girls, and walked to the next town. Darius found us in 2 days. He broke my wrist and told me if I ever tried again, he'd kill the girls in front of me and make me watch." "Did you believe him?" "Yes." No hesitation. "He meant every word." Tucker leaned forward. "Mrs. Morse, in your professional medical opinion," he paused. "I understand you served as a midwife before your marriage?" Evelyn blinked in surprise. "I did. How did you—" "I do my research. You delivered over 50 babies in your community, by all accounts with skill and care. So in your professional opinion, was the forced relations 3 days after giving birth medically dangerous?" "Extremely. I was still hemorrhaging. The trauma could have killed me." Evelyn's voice went clinical, finding safety in medical facts. Any competent midwife would have told him to wait at least 6 weeks. But Darius didn't care about medical advice. He cared about asserting ownership. Tucker nodded slowly. "And the violence in front of your children, was it regular?" "Daily. He wanted them to see, wanted them to understand that this was their future too, that resistance was pointless, that men had absolute authority." Evelyn's hands clenched. "He told June she'd grow up to be just like me, told her she'd better learn to take a beating gracefully or she'd end up worse." Mrs. Henderson made a small sound of distress. Tucker's pen paused. "Mrs. Morse, I need to ask you something difficult. Were any of your daughters physically abused by their father?" Evelyn's face went white. For a long moment, she couldn't speak. Then, "He hit June twice, once when she was 8 for talking back, once when she was 9 for standing between him and me during a beating. He said he was training her early." Her voice broke. "That's when I knew I had to find a way out. I could survive his violence against me, but watching him start on my daughters—" She couldn't finish. The sobs came hard and wrenching, 6 years of suppressed anguish finally breaking free. Caleb moved without thinking, kneeling beside her chair and taking her good hand in both of his. "You did get out," he said quietly. "You're here. You're safe. And he's never touching you or your daughters again." Evelyn clung to his hand like a lifeline while the storm of grief worked through her. Tucker waited patiently, his expression compassionate. When she finally calmed enough to continue, he asked a few more questions, then closed his notebook. "That's enough for today. We have sufficient testimony to proceed with federal charges." He looked at Evelyn with genuine respect. "Mrs. Morse, what you did today took extraordinary courage. Speaking truth about abuse is one of the hardest things a person can do." "What happens now?" Evelyn's voice was hoarse. "Now, I take this testimony back to the territorial capital. The federal prosecutor will review the evidence and decide on charges. Given what you've told me, along with the witness statements and the attempted assault in front of multiple witnesses, I expect he'll pursue aggravated assault, unlawful imprisonment, and possibly attempted murder. Tucker paused. There will be a trial. You'll have to testify again, in court, with Darius present. Evelyn paled but nodded. I'll do it. You're sure? Because once we start this process, I'm sure. Evelyn's voice strengthened. I spent 6 years being silent, being invisible, letting him tell his version of events while I swallowed mine. I'm done being silent. Tucker smiled, the first real smile Caleb had seen from him. Good. Because men like Darius Morse only get away with this when women are too afraid to speak. You speaking? That's how we stop the next one. After Tucker and Mrs. Henderson left, Evelyn sat on the porch and watched her daughters playing in the yard. Millie was showing Sadie how to make flower crowns from prairie grass. June sat in the shade with Rosie, singing softly. They looked almost normal, almost like children who hadn't spent their entire lives learning to be invisible. They're going to be all right, Caleb said, settling beside her. Are they? Evelyn's doubt was palpable. June still sleeps with a knife under her pillow. Sadie won't eat unless someone else tries the food first. Millie apologizes for breathing too loud. They're damaged, Caleb. All of them. They're healing, he corrected gently. There's a difference. How do you know? Because yesterday, Millie laughed at something Sadie said. Really laughed. Not that nervous sound she makes when she thinks someone expects her to be happy. And this morning, June asked me a question without flinching first. Small things, but they matter. Evelyn absorbed this. Then quietly, and me? Am I healing? Caleb looked at her, really looked, at the way she sat without curling into herself. The way she'd stopped apologizing for existing. The way she'd faced Tucker's questions without breaking. You stood up to Darius when he came at you with that knife, Caleb said. You didn't freeze, didn't beg, you moved. That's not the same woman who was lying unconscious in the street 4 days ago. That woman wanted to die. Evelyn's admission was stark. I prayed for it every night, begged for the courage to just... She stopped, glanced at her daughters. But I couldn't leave them alone with him. And now? Evelyn was quiet for a long moment, watching Rosie's small fist wrap around June's finger. Now I want to live. Actually live. Not just survive. I want to watch my daughters grow up free. Want to see what kind of women they become when they're not being taught to make themselves small. She paused. Is that selfish? Wanting more than just escape? It's human, Caleb replied, and there's nothing selfish about wanting to be whole. The weeks that followed brought a slow transformation. Evelyn's broken wrist healed enough to remove the splint. Her nightmares came less frequently. She started helping with the ranch work, small tasks at first, then gradually more as her strength returned. She had a gift with animals, Caleb discovered. The chickens that squawked and flapped at everyone else would settle quietly when she approached. The milk cow that kicked when Caleb tried to handle her stood placid for Evelyn's gentle hands. My grandmother taught me, Evelyn explained one morning as she coaxed the stubborn cow into position. Before she died, before my mother's illness got bad, she said animals can sense fear and kindness both, and they respond to whichever one you carry. What do you carry? Caleb asked. Evelyn considered this while the milk pinged steadily into the bucket. I used to carry fear exclusively. Now? I'm not sure. Maybe hope, or at least the possibility of it. The girls blossomed in ways that were sometimes painful to witness. June slowly released her death grip on adult responsibility, letting herself be 10 years old occasionally. She played with her sisters, read the few books Caleb had, and even smiled sometimes, without it looking like an obligation. Sadie's transformation was more subtle. She stopped testing the food first, started speaking in full sentences instead of frightened whispers. One evening, she asked Caleb to teach her to whittle, and when he showed her how to hold the knife safely, she didn't flinch when he moved his hands near hers. Millie's change was the most dramatic. The child who'd apologized for breathing too loud started singing while she worked, started asking questions about everything, why the sky was blue, how birds knew where to fly, whether stars were really holes in the night. Her curiosity, so long suppressed, erupted like a spring finally freed from rock. And Rosie, too young to remember the violence, simply grew, getting stronger and louder and more demanding in the way healthy babies do. 6 weeks after the standoff, Martha rode out with news. Trial set for next month, federal court in the territorial capital. Tucker says they've got Darius on multiple charges: aggravated assault, unlawful imprisonment, attempted murder from when he came at Evelyn with the knife. Evelyn's hands tightened on the bread dough she was kneading. Will I have to testify again? Yes, but Tucker says the evidence is strong even without your testimony. They've got witness statements, medical evidence, and about 15 men who saw Darius try to kill you in broad daylight. What about Sheriff Calhoun? Caleb asked. Martha's smile was grim. Under federal investigation for obstruction of justice and enabling domestic violence. Turns out when the territorial governor started looking into his record, they found a pattern. At least a dozen complaints from women that Calhoun dismissed as family matters. He's been suspended pending review. Good, Evelyn said quietly. He enabled so much suffering, told so many women they had no recourse. The day of the trial, Caleb drove Evelyn and the girls to the territorial capital in a borrowed wagon. The journey took 2 days, and they stayed in a boarding house that Tucker had arranged. The night before the trial, Evelyn couldn't sleep. Caleb found her sitting on the boarding house porch at midnight, staring at the darkened street. Scared? He asked, settling beside her. Terrified. Her honesty was becoming easier. Tomorrow I have to face him. Have to sit in the same room while he stares at me and tries to make me small again. You're not small. You never were. He just convinced you otherwise. What if I freeze? What if I can't speak? Caleb took her hand, an intimacy they'd grown comfortable with over the weeks. Then you take a breath and try again. And if you can't, Tucker has enough evidence to convict without your testimony. But Evelyn? He waited until she looked at him. You won't freeze. You've already proven you're stronger than fear. The courtroom was packed. News of the case had spread. A federal prosecution for domestic violence was rare, and people came from all over the territory to watch. Evelyn walked in with her head high, Caleb on one side and Martha on the other. The girls stayed with Mrs. Henderson at the boarding house. Darius sat at the defense table, thinner than Caleb remembered, his eyes burning with rage. When Evelyn entered, those eyes locked onto her with such hatred that several people in the gallery gasped. But Evelyn didn't look away, didn't shrink. She met his stare with steady courage and then deliberately turned her attention to the judge. The trial lasted 3 days. Witness after witness testified to what they'd seen. Morris describing the beating in the street, Thomas Riley's account of being dragged behind Darius's horse, the women who'd defended the ranch describing the siege. Preacher Walsh testified about the lies he'd written, his shame palpable. When Evelyn finally took the stand, the courtroom went silent. Tucker led her through her testimony with gentle precision, and she answered every question clearly, her voice never wavering. She detailed the abuse, the fear, the systematic destruction of her sense of self-worth. She explained how Darius had used the law and social pressure to trap her, how he'd made sure everyone believed she was the problem. And when he came at you with the knife, Tucker asked, what went through your mind? That I wasn't going to die for him? Evelyn's voice rang clear. That I'd survived 6 years of his violence, and I wasn't going to let the last thing I ever did be bleeding out while he stood over me triumphant. So I moved, and for the first time in my marriage, I chose myself over his control. The defense attorney tried to break her on cross-examination, suggesting she was exaggerating, that she'd provoked the violence, that her family history of mental illness made her unreliable. But Evelyn had spent weeks preparing for this, and she met each insinuation with calm facts. My mother suffered from mental illness, she said clearly. That's tragic, not shameful. And it has nothing to do with whether my husband beat me. The bruises on my body aren't hereditary. They're criminal. The courtroom erupted in murmurs. The judge gavelled for silence. When Darius himself took the stand, he was belligerent and defensive. He claimed he'd been patient with a difficult wife, that he'd only used necessary discipline, that Evelyn had been turning his daughters against him. She was poisoning them with lies, he insisted, making them afraid of their own father. Or, Tucker said quietly, they were afraid because they watched you beat their mother unconscious, because you told June she'd grow up to take beatings just like her mother, because you created a household ruled by terror and called it family. Darius's face went purple. I had every right. You had no right. Tucker's voice was steel. Not under federal law. Not under basic human decency. You took a woman who trusted you and systematically destroyed her. You traumatized 4 innocent children. You used your physical strength and social position to inflict suffering, and then you tried to murder her when she finally escaped. The defense attorney objected, but the damage was done. The jury had seen Darius's rage, his entitlement, his complete lack of remorse. After 3 days of testimony, the jury deliberated for less than 2 hours. They returned with a verdict that sent a shock through the entire territory. Guilty on all counts. The judge sentenced Darius to 15 years hard labor at the territorial prison, with a recommendation that he never be allowed contact with his wife or children again. He also issued a formal rebuke of Sheriff Calhoun's handling of the case and recommended the territory implement new protocols for domestic violence complaints. When the verdict was read, Evelyn's knees buckled. Caleb caught her, held her upright while she wept tears of relief and release. Around them, women in the gallery were crying too. Women who'd lived with similar violence, who'd been told it was their fault, who'd never dreamed they'd see a man actually held accountable. Outside the courthouse, reporters surrounded them, but Marshal Tucker ran interference. Mrs. Morse has given enough of herself to this process. Let her have peace. They returned to the ranch 3 days later, and something had shifted. The girls seemed lighter, as if a weight they'd been carrying had finally been lifted. Even June, who still struggled with trusting the world, seemed to breathe easier. That evening, as the sun set over the prairie, Evelyn stood on the porch watching the sky turn colors she was finally learning to appreciate again. Caleb joined her, and they stood in comfortable silence. "What happens now?" Evelyn asked eventually. "I mean, Darius is in prison, but I'm still his wife under territorial law, still legally bound to a man who tried to kill me." Tucker mentioned that. Federal prosecutor is working on getting the marriage annulled on grounds of fraud and extreme cruelty. Should be processed within a few months. And then? Then you're free. Caleb paused. Completely free. To go wherever you want, do whatever you want, build whatever life you choose. Evelyn was quiet for a long moment. What if I want to stay here? Would you mind? Caleb's heart kicked hard against his ribs. Stay? As in I have nowhere else to go and no family to return to. As in my daughters have started to feel safe here. As in, Evelyn stopped, gathered her courage. As in you've shown me what kindness looks like, and I'd like to learn more about it. Evelyn, Caleb chose his words carefully. I don't want you to feel obligated. You don't owe me anything for helping you. I know that. She turned to face him fully. That's exactly why I want to stay, because you've never demanded anything, never expected payment or gratitude or submission. You've just, she struggled for words. You've just been decent, and that's so rare I almost don't know how to process it. I care about you, Caleb admitted, about all of you. But I don't want to rush you into anything. You're just now learning to be free. You should take time to figure out who you are without someone else defining you. I appreciate that. Evelyn's smile was small but genuine. But I'm not talking about marriage or romance or any of that. I'm talking about partnership, about building something real with someone who treats me like a person instead of property. Partnership, Caleb repeated, testing the word. I'm good with animals and gardening. June's smart as a whip and could run this whole ranch if you taught her. Sadie has a gift for numbers. Millie makes everything beautiful without trying. We could... Evelyn paused, vulnerability clear on her face. We could help, if you'd let us. If you don't mind sharing your space with a ready-made family. Caleb looked at this woman who'd survived the unsurvivable, who'd found courage in the darkest places, who was offering not romance but something more valuable, honest partnership built on mutual respect. I'd like that, he said quietly. I'd like that very much. The summer deepened into something rich and full. Caleb finished the cabin's remaining rooms, and Evelyn helped paint the walls with whitewash she mixed herself. The girls each got their own small space. June near her mother, Sadie and Millie sharing a room they decorated with wildflowers and drawings. Baby Rosie's cradle sat in a corner of Evelyn's room, the same cradle Caleb had started 6 years ago for the son he'd lost. He'd shown it to Evelyn one evening, explained its history. She'd run her fingers over the carved wood and said, "Grief doesn't have to end in emptiness. Sometimes it can transform into something that holds new life." And somehow, that simple observation had helped Caleb release the last of his guilt about moving forward. The annulment came through in August, delivered by Marshal Tucker himself. Evelyn held the papers with shaking hands, staring at the official seal that declared her marriage dissolved. "You're free," Tucker said simply. "Legally, officially free." Evelyn had expected to feel relief. Instead, she felt terrified. "What do I do with freedom? I've never had it before." "Whatever you want," Tucker replied. "That's the whole point." She spent the next week in a kind of daze, trying to comprehend that no one could legally force her to do anything, that her choices were her own, that she could say no and have it mean something. Caleb gave her space to process, but he was there when she needed to talk through the strangeness of autonomy. One night, she asked him, "How do you know when you're making a good choice versus just reacting to years of bad ones?" "You don't always," Caleb admitted, "but you make the choice anyway. And if it's wrong, you make a different one next time. That's what freedom means, the right to make mistakes and learn from them." That sounds exhausting. It is, but it's also the only way to really live. In September, June turned 11. They celebrated with a cake that Millie helped bake and presents that Caleb had quietly accumulated. A new dress for June, books for Sadie, paints for Millie, a carved rattle for Rosie. It was the first birthday any of the girls could remember that didn't involve fear. That evening, June approached Caleb while he was fixing a fence post. She stood watching him work, her expression serious. "What is it?" Caleb asked, setting down his hammer. "I want to call you something other than Mr. Ward," June said carefully. "But I don't know what's appropriate. You're not my father, but you're—" She struggled for words. "You're the first man who's ever protected me instead of hurting me. That should have a name, but I don't know what it is." Caleb's throat tightened. "What would you like to call me?" June considered. "Caleb feels too familiar. Mr. Ward feels too formal. What if—" She paused. "What if I just called you Caleb when it's family, and Mr. Ward when there's company? Would that be all right?" "More than all right," Caleb managed. June nodded, satisfied. Then, in a rush, "I'm glad Mama brought us here. I'm glad you said yes when you could have said no. I'm glad—" Her voice cracked. "I'm glad I know what safe feels like now." She ran off before Caleb could respond, but he stood there for a long time, hammer forgotten, feeling the weight and gift of that trust. As autumn arrived and the prairie grass turned gold, Evelyn started talking about the future in concrete terms. She wanted to expand the garden, maybe get some goats, wanted to teach the girls to read and write properly, since their education had been neglected. Wanted to learn new skills herself. She'd always been interested in beekeeping, but had never been allowed to pursue it. "Darius said it was too dangerous," she explained. "Said I'd just get stung and make a fuss." "So get some bees," Caleb said. "I'll help you build the hives." Evelyn stared at him. "Just like that? You'd help me do something just because I want to?" "Why wouldn't I?" "Because—" She stopped, recognizing the old patterns. "Because that's not how it worked before. Before, wanting something was dangerous. It gave him ammunition." "I'm not him," Caleb said gently. "Your wants matter here." Evelyn absorbed this, the simple revolutionary truth of it. Then she smiled, a full, genuine smile that transformed her face. "Then yes, I want bees. Let's get bees." One evening in late September, with the girls already asleep and the house finally quiet, Evelyn and Caleb sat on the porch watching the stars emerge. The air was cooling finally, autumn beginning to assert itself. "I've been thinking," Evelyn said carefully, "about the future, about what I want it to look like. And I want this." She gestured at the ranch, at the life they'd built. "Not just the safety, though that's precious, but the partnership, the respect, the way you ask my opinion about ranch decisions like it matters, the way you teach my daughters they're valuable, the way you—" She stopped, gathered courage. "The way you look at me like I'm a person worth knowing." "You are," Caleb said quietly. "I know that now, intellectually. But feeling it? That's harder." Evelyn paused. I'm not ready for romance. Maybe I never will be. The thought of a man touching me that way still makes my skin crawl. That's understandable. Darius did real damage. But I want you to know, if I ever do heal enough to want that kind of closeness again, it would be with someone like you, someone kind, someone safe. She looked at him directly. I'm not asking for promises or commitments. I'm just saying, you've shown me what good men can be, and that matters. Caleb felt his own eyes sting. Evelyn, you don't have to. I know I don't, but I wanted to say it anyway. She smiled. Because you deserve to know you're valued too. That this partnership we've built, it's not just you doing charity. You've given me and my daughters a home, yes, but we've given you a family, and that's a fair trade. It was, Caleb realized, more than fair. These 5 people who'd crashed into his carefully maintained isolation had given him reasons to wake up, to build, to care about tomorrow. They'd reminded him what it meant to be alive. Fair trade, he agreed. They sat in comfortable silence while the stars wheeled overhead. Somewhere in the house, Rosie made a small sound and settled back to sleep. The prairie wind whispered through the grass, carrying the scent of coming autumn. In late October, a letter arrived from Marshal Tucker. The territorial governor had implemented new domestic violence protocols. Sheriff Calhoun had been permanently removed from office. And the prosecutor was using Evelyn's case as precedent to pursue other cases of spousal abuse that had been previously dismissed. You changed things, Caleb said, showing Evelyn the letter. By speaking up, by testifying, you changed the whole system. Evelyn read the letter 3 times, tears streaming down her face. All those women who were told it was family business, who were told they had no recourse, they'll have a chance now. Because of you. Because of us. Evelyn corrected. Because you stood up when you didn't have to. Because Martha and the others risked their lives. Because Thomas testified despite the danger. Because enough people said no to injustice that it finally mattered. That evening, they gathered the girls and explained what the letter meant. June listened with fierce attention, her young face grave. So Mama speaking the truth actually helped other people? She asked. Yes, Caleb confirmed. June looked at her mother with something like awe. You're a hero. Evelyn shook her head. I'm just a woman who got tired of being silent. That's what heroes are, June insisted. People who do the hard thing even when they're scared. As winter approached, they prepared the ranch together, storing food, reinforcing the barn, making sure they had enough firewood and supplies to last through the cold months. The work was hard but satisfying, and there was something profound about planning for a future that felt secure. One December evening, the first snow of winter beginning to fall, Caleb found Evelyn in the room he still thought of as the nursery. She was standing by the window, watching the snow, baby Rosie sleeping against her shoulder. You all right? He asked quietly. More than all right. Evelyn's voice was full of wonder. I was just thinking, a year ago I was praying for death, begging for it to end, and now... She gestured at the warm room, at her sleeping daughter, at the life she'd built. Now I'm standing in a house that's mine, holding a child who'll never know her father's violence, watching snow fall and actually looking forward to tomorrow. That's a lot of change in 1 year. It is. Evelyn turned to face him. And I know I still have hard days, still wake up expecting pain, still flinch at things that remind me of before. But Caleb, those moments are getting further apart. And the good moments, the moments where I feel genuinely happy, those are getting more frequent. I'm glad. Me too. She paused, then added, I've been thinking about something Preacher Walsh said when he brought the marshal. He said good people standing up is how we stop the next Darius Morse. And I realized that's what we're doing here. Every day I show my daughters that women have value, that they deserve respect, that they can say no. That's preventing future abuse. We're breaking the cycle. You're breaking the cycle, Caleb corrected gently. We, Evelyn insisted. Because you're showing my daughters what good men look like. You're teaching them that strength can protect instead of dominate. That's just as important as anything I'm teaching them. Outside, the snow fell heavier, blanketing the prairie in white. Inside, the fire crackled warm, and the house smelled of the stew Evelyn had made for dinner. It was simple, ordinary, and absolutely precious because of it. On Christmas Eve, they gathered around the fire, and Evelyn told her daughters something she'd been saving. "I want you to know," she said carefully, "that what happened with your father, that wasn't normal. That wasn't how families should be. I'm sorry I let you think it was for so long." "You didn't let us think anything," June said firmly. "Papa made us all believe we deserved it. That's not your fault." "Maybe not, but I should have fought harder, should have left sooner." "Mama," Sadie's voice was surprisingly strong, "you left when you could. That's what matters." Millie nodded agreement. "And now we're here, and it's good here." "Is it?" Evelyn asked. "Really?" "Because you can tell me if you're not happy. If you want something different." "I want this," June interrupted. "I want a place where I can sleep without being afraid, where I can make mistakes without getting hurt, where—" her voice dropped to a whisper, "where I'm allowed to be a child sometimes." The other girls murmured agreement. Even Rosie, too young to understand, seemed to sense the importance of the moment and stayed quiet in Evelyn's arms. "Then this is what we'll build," Evelyn said firmly. "A home, a real home, where everyone is valued and no one has to be afraid." That night, after the girls were asleep, Evelyn and Caleb stood on the porch despite the cold. The snow had stopped and the prairie was transformed into something magical under the moonlight. "Thank you," Evelyn said quietly, "for everything. For standing up in town, for taking us in, for being patient while we heal, for—" She stopped, overwhelmed. "You don't have to thank me." "I do, though, because you saved our lives. Not just physically, but—" Evelyn struggled for words. "You showed us that life could be different, that we deserved better. That's a kind of salvation I didn't even know to ask for." Caleb was quiet for a moment, then, "You saved mine too. I was dead, Evelyn, not physically, but in every way that mattered. I'd given up on connection, on purpose, on everything except existing. And then you and your daughters crashed into my life and reminded me what it meant to care about something. So we saved each other." "Yeah, I guess we did." They stood in companionable silence, watching the moonlight on snow, both of them thinking about how far they'd come and how far they still had to go. "Evelyn?" Caleb said eventually. "Yes?" "I don't know what the future holds. Don't know if you'll want to stay here forever, or if someday you'll want to build something else somewhere else. But whatever you decide, however this works out, I want you to know I'm grateful. For this year, for this partnership, for the chance to be part of something good again." Evelyn reached out and took his hand, no longer tentative contact, but easy familiarity. "I'm staying, Caleb. Not because I have nowhere else to go, but because this is where I want to be. With someone who treats me as an equal, who gives my daughters room to grow, who—" She paused. "Who made space for us when he didn't have to?" "Always," Caleb said simply. "There's always space for you here." As winter deepened and then slowly released into early spring, the ranch truly became home. June started teaching her sisters their letters using books Caleb borrowed from town. Sadie discovered a talent for calculating feed amounts and supply needs. Millie's drawings decorated every wall. Rosie took her first steps, tumbling into Caleb's arms with absolute trust. And Evelyn bloomed. That was the only word for it. She laughed more, spoke her opinions freely, made decisions about ranch operations that Caleb implemented without question. She got her B's in March, and when she got stung the first time, she just laughed and said, "Worth it." One evening in April, exactly a year after the day Caleb had pulled her onto his horse, Evelyn stood in the doorway watching the sunset paint the prairie in shades of gold and rose. Caleb joined her and they stood shoulder to shoulder. "You know what I realized today?" Evelyn said. "What?" "I went the whole day without being afraid. Not once. No flinching, no panic, no checking to make sure I hadn't done something wrong." She turned to him with wonder in her eyes. "I just lived, normally, like a person who's never been hurt." "That's good," Caleb said, his voice rough with emotion. "It's more than good. It's miraculous." Evelyn looked back at the sunset. "A year ago, I was lying in the street bleeding. 6 months ago, I was testifying in court about the worst moments of my life. And now—" She gestured at the ranch, at the life they'd built. Now I'm standing in my home, watching the sunset, and actually looking forward to tomorrow. What does tomorrow look like? Caleb asked. Evelyn smiled. Ordinary. Beautifully, wonderfully ordinary. I'll tend my bees, the girls will do their lessons. We'll eat dinner together and talk about our days. And when I go to sleep, I'll do it without fear. She paused. That's all I ever wanted, really. Not rescue or romance or anything dramatic, just ordinary days that don't hurt. You've got them now, Caleb said, for as long as you want them. Forever, Evelyn replied without hesitation. I want this forever. And as the sun disappeared below the horizon and the first stars appeared, Caleb Ward and Evelyn Morse stood together on the porch of a ranch that had transformed from a monument to grief into a testament to healing. They weren't husband and wife in the romantic sense. Might never be. But they were partners, friends, family, by choice rather than obligation. Inside, 4 girls slept safe. Outside, the prairie stretched endless and clean. And in between, 2 people who'd been broken by life discovered that sometimes the best healing comes not from being saved, but from choosing to save yourself. The story could have ended in violence, in tragedy, in more silence and suffering. Instead, it ended in the radical act of survival, in the revolutionary choice to demand better, in the simple, powerful truth that everyone, no matter how broken, how beaten, how told they were worthless, everyone deserves a life without fear. And sometimes, just sometimes, they get it.